The following takes place from Darren's journey to Vampire Mountain. It is the continuing part to the first part. A lot of what you will hear is from the books. I decided not to alter the story because the books part of the story was too good. Although if a film is made, it will have to be altered to make it more film friendly. I must also state, as I have before, that I am not trying to copyright, steal or alter the Cirque book series by Darren Shan. This is only a tale of opinion and does not influence the Cirque books and or film franchise or any parties wishing to continue or not to continue the Cirque franchise from a film point of view. Journey to the Mountain Part 3. Burr Attack. The scene opens with Darren playing with Rudy, the baby cub. He is sitting with the little people, Harcourt and Jacob. Mr. Kratzer and Gavner and Rudy's parents are a long way away hunting. Mr. Kratzer and Gavner are looking to feed, as there was not any blood in the way station. They are a long way away from where Darren, Rudy and the little people are at camp. In the camp where Darren, Rudy and the little people are, they're all sitting by a campfire, trying to keep warm. Rudy, the infant cub, keeps pawing at the embers that keep coming out of the fire. Darren keeps trying to pull him away from the fire so he will not hurt himself. He is saying, "Relax, Rudy. Burn hurts. Stay away." Trying to keep him away. Rudy begins to wander away from the fire and over to some small boulders that were about 6 yards away. Darren follows Rudy. Little do they know, something is lurking in the woods, watching their every move. Little do they know. Rudy climbs up some of the boulders and is on top. Rudy climbs up some of the boulders and is on the top of one, which is about 1.5 meters high. 1.5 meters high. And then for some strange reason, he turns around and starts to growl at Darren. Grr, grr. Darren says, "Come on, you're not that high up, Rudy. But Rudy keeps growling. And then Rudy starts howling like a mini howl because he is only small. And then he starts growling again. Darren thinks that this is strange. Why is Rudy acting funny? And then, from out of nowhere, there is this loud, evil growl. It is coming from behind Darren. Roar! He begins to turn slowly, but less than 7 yards away, a big polar bear comes out of nowhere and knocks Darren flying out of the way. Boom! Darren hits the ground with a thud. Thwack! The bear stood up and swiped at Darren. The bear stands up and swipes at Darren, who is still on the boulder. The bear stood up and swiped at Rudy, who was still on the boulder. He jumped off the boulder before the bear made contact and landed on a tree branch that was near. He started to climb up the branches. The bear scrambled and tried to get hold of Rudy, and so he violently begins to shake the tree that Rudy is on. Darren stood up and threw a nearby rock at the bear. Thwack! It hit the bear on the back of the head. The bear looked around and growled at Darren angrily. The bear was a big polar bear with a psychotic expression on its face, and it was slavering at the mouth. Darren said, "Hey, you, pick on someone your own size." Then the bear began to charge at Darren. Darren ran in the opposite direction, tripped over a rock, and fell to the ground. The bear was on Darren, claws and teeth on display, ready for the kill. Harcourt, one of the little people, jumped on the bear's back and tried to strangle the bear. The branch that Rudy was on broke and fell to the ground. He ran to the side and howled like crazy. He was calling his parents. The bird shoot wildly, trying to get Harcourt off its back. The other little person had an idea. He got hold of the branch that Rudy was on and shoved the top half of it into the campfire. As he took it out, the flames were ablaze. The branch was ablaze. He ran to the burr and stuck it at the burr's legs and stomach. The burr roared at Jacob, threw Harcourt off his back, and was now after Jacob. Jacob began to back up, but tripped and fell over the burr. Dove on top of the bird, dove on top of Jacob, and began clawing at Jacob. This dark green liquid, where blood was supposed to be, began to pour out of Jacob's stomach, abs, area of his body. Jacob was screaming in agony. Darren got to his feet and got one of the boulders that Rudy had been playing on. It was about 4 stone in weight. Darren got the boulder and threw it at the back of the head of the burr. Bang! It hit the back of the burr's head and snapped into 2 halves. The burr roared around and tried to get to his feet, but stumbled to the floor. Darren was on this sudden mishap from the burr. He ran over to the burr and smashed the boulder over his face. Wallop! Splat! There was no blood on the boulder from the burr's face. Harcourt got hold of an even bigger boulder, about 6 stone in weight, and started to pound it on the burr's face. After the 7th whack from Harcourt, the boulder was covered in the burr's blood. The burr stopped roaring and fell silent. It was dead. Harcourt rolled off the burr and fell to his knees. Silence followed. Rudy was still howling wildly. Darren got up and walked over to Jacob, who was in pieces from the burr's attack, and was dead. Darren went over to Harcourt and knelt down beside him and said, "I'm sorry about your brother." And then Harcourt did something that Darren thought that the little people could not do. He spoke. He said, "Jacob, not brother. Jacob, friend of little people." Eventually, Mr. Crepsley, Gavner, and the adult wolves returned. The wolves were the first ones to appear. They had heard Rudy's howling. They attended to their son, who seemed fine, just shaken up a lot. Mr. Crepsley said that the wolves were the first ones to hear Rudy's howling. We returned because we could sense that something was wrong. "What happened?" asked Mr. Crepsley. Darren explained to Mr. Crepsley what had happened. Mr. Crepsley listened intently. When Darren got to the part about Harcourt speaking, Mr. Crepsley didn't believe him, so he wandered over to Harcourt, who was still kneeling on the ground, and spoke to him. He found out that Harcourt could speak. Gavner asked that could any of the other little people speak. Harcourt said, "I don't think so." Harcourt said that something had happened to his voice box when Mr. Tiny had changed him from small to big. Gavner said, "I think we should move on, Larton, just in case another unwanted guest turns up." Mr. Crepsley says, "I agree. Let's get our things together and go." Darren says, "What about Jacob's body?" "We leave it," says Gavner. "No, we can't," says Darren. "Ask Harcourt what we should do with it," says Mr. Crepsley. Darren walked over to Harcourt and asked Harcourt what to do with Jacob's body. "Bury him where he is. Cover him in the snow. Maybe now he can rest in peace," says Harcourt. So they began to bury Jacob in the snow. So they began to bury Jacob in the snow that was around the snow that was around him. While Gavner and Darren bury the dead little person, Mr. Krebsley walked over to the dead bird's body and stuck his finger in the bird's blood to test it, and said to Darren, "You say it had a sarcastic look on its face?" "Yeah," says Darren, putting snow on the little person's body. Splat! Mr. Krebsley spat out the blood that he had tested from the bird. "This is the bird that killed that dead Vampanese in the way station. The blood tastes very sour. That is what drove the bird insane. That was what drove the bird mad. Although it is sour, it is very, very absorbent. And once it gets into the individual's bloodline, its very overactive substance will make the subject kill anything. Eventually the bird would have died from an heart attack," says Mr. Krebsley. "So the bird had gone mad with hunger," says Gavner. "So let's move on, just in case this happens again," says Darren. "Before we go, in case we lose you too, Harcourt, what is Mr. Tiny's message of the vampire for the vampire princes?" said Mr. Krebsley. Harcourt says, "Okay, I will tell you, just in case I don't get to the mountain." He took out a small scroll and read Mr. Tiny's message out loud. "The Lord of the Vampire's time is at hand." Mr. Krebsley looked on, shocked. Gavner was shocked too. He said, "Well, we'll discuss this as we walk. It is only a few hours till morning." So the four guys walked away to leave Jacob and the savage bird to rest in peace. Just bring it on a bit. Journey to the Mountain 4. Journey to the Mountain Part 4 finally arrived. A day or two later, the gang arrived at the bottom of the mountain. The wolves had left them now. That was sad to see them go. Harcourt had explained what he knew about Mr. Tiny's message, which was very little. He also explained that Mr. Tiny had brought him back to life from being dead, and that he had no memory of who he had once been, and was told to look at the cirque by Mr. Tiny. And with Mr. Tiny transforming him bigger now, he had the ability to talk and could recall certain things from his past. Not a lot, but certain pictures and things and images and things of that nature. Yeah, they had arrived at the bottom of the big hill / mountain. It was a dark night and very cold. The hill was extremely wide. It looked impossible to get around it. Darren said, "Where do we go now? It looks impossible to get around the hill. How are we?" Darren stopped and said, "We're here, aren't we?" Gavner said, "Yep, got it in one. We just have to find the right boulder on the bottom of the mountain," said Gavner. He began to search the rocks and stones that were at the bottom of the mountain. Mr. Krebsley, Darren and Harcourt looked on. "There doesn't seem to be a lever here," said Gavner, filling the rocks and boulders. Mr. Krebsley said jokingly, "Come on, Gavner, this millennium will do." "Ha! Found it," said Gavner, turning a small rock anti-clockwise, and the bigger boulder moved out of the way, revealing an entrance inside the mountain. They all walked in, and the entrance closed automatically. Inside the mountain it was light, but not too dark, as Darren thought it might have been. Gavner said to himself, "Feels good to be home." Gavner said, "Come on, let's go say hello." So they began walking through the tunnels. There were tunnels everywhere, big ones, small ones, some that needed you to kneel to get through, ones that led in different directions. Gavin and Mr. Kretzer seemed to know where they were going. Darren noticed that in the corners there was this light candle-looking stuff that was giving off light. It was all over the place, in corners and small gaps. Without it, they would be in total darkness. Not that it mattered with the vampire's super eyesight, but it was nice to see where they were going, so they wouldn't bump into rocks and things. Darren asked what it was. Mr. Kretzer replied, it's called numinous liching. It's like light that never goes out, so you don't get lost. It has been here forever. Don't know how it grows, or who put it here. It is one of nature's untold wonders. I've never heard of it, said Darren. You wouldn't have. It went into fashion when mankind invented the light bulb, replied Gavin. They proceeded upward through the mountain and eventually came to these big old-fashioned doors. They were creamy brown. Gavin walked up to the door and knocked on them. There was silence for a moment. Then there was a rustling coming from the other side of the door, and then the door opened a fraction. There was blinding light coming from the inside of the door. It was blinding after being in the partly lit dark tunnel for so long. They all shielded their eyes until their eyes adjusted to the light. A lean person / vampire appeared from behind the door. He was wearing dark green clothes and was holding a sharp, curved, long sword. He was the guard. He cast an eye over Mr. Kretzer and Gavin, and Darren and Harkness. He frowned when he came to Darren and Harkness. He put his right hand on his sword. Darren looked through the door and noticed that more people in similar clothes were doing the same thing. The guard said out loud, "Address yourself at the gate." Mr. Kretzer had mentioned that they may do this. Mr. Kretzer went first. He said, "I am Sergeant Kretzer, here to seek counsel," as he said, banging his chest with his right hand. Gavin went next and said, "I am Governor Pruill, come to seek counsel," banging his chest with his right hand. Before Darren could speak, the guard said, "Sergeant Kretzer and Governor Pruill are recognized. But these are the two," he said, pointing the tip of his sword to Darren Harford. "They are our travelling companions. The boy is my assistant, a half-vampire, Mr. Kretzer." "Do you vouch for him?" said the guard. "I do," said Mr. Kretzer. "His name is Darren Shine," added Mr. Kretzer. The guard looked at Darren curiously, and then said, "Then Darren Shine is recognized at the door." "And what of this one?" said the guard, pointing his sword at Harford. "This is no vampire. What business do you have at council?" said the guard, questioningly. "His name is Harford Knowles. He is a little person," said Darren. "A little person?" said the guard. "One of Des Tiny's little people? What good are they? They do not even speak, and they are very, very ugly creatures," said the guard. "You are not exactly an oil painting yourself," said Darren, noticing on the guard's stiffness and queer behaviour. "What did you say, freak?" said the guard angrily, taking a step forward, sword an inch from Harker's throat. "I have a message to deliver personally to the princess from Des Tiny himself." "Des Tiny?" said the guard, surprised. Immediately the guard lowered his sword. "I shall not be the one to interfere in Des Tiny's activities. I like the ability to be able to breathe through my lungs on my own," said the guard. Darren looked at the guard, confused. Harcourt Moulds is recognized that Harcourt, the little person, is recognized. Please, gentlemen, enter and be well. Enjoy your stay enjoy and be well. Harcourt is recognized. Please, gentlemen, enter and be well during your stay at the mountain, said the guard, opening the door and stepping to one side to let them pass. They all entered, and as soon as they entered, bang! The door shut behind them. The journey to Vampire Mountain was over, but the challenge for Darren was only just beginning.